So, Elliot, thanks so much for being on the show.
Happy to be here.
I actually love to start with a little, I don't know, exploration of why this is what you do. Like why what's your interest in infidelity and recovery and why, I assume you're passionate about this. So I'm curious about what brought you to the work.
Well, I am. So, as a sex therapist, I work on what I call the three ins, um, intimacy skills, infertility, and infidelity. And oftentimes the three of them intersect quite evenly.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah. And so I really started doing a lot of infidelity work in my couples therapy.
Hmm.
Uh, and what I learned early on in my career is this really is a specialty.
Yes.
Uh, there's a lot of core structures and core knowledge that a therapist has to have to really effectively deal with infidelity, because the pains and the injuries are very different for each partner. And
Hmm.
being able to hold the differences in experience becomes really important. And so then when I went to get my PhD in human sexuality, I decided that this was going to be my dissertation.
Okay.
And so I did my whole dissertation on infidelity recovery.
I'm imagining you must find this somehow hopeful or uplifting or positive because I personally, in my own work with couples, this is one of the hardest things I deal with. So somehow you must have tapped into something that feeds you in this work.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful when it comes to infidelity. Infidelities happen in really good relationships.
Yes.
And what I tell people in the beginning is there's a couple of truths we have to hold. First of all, infidelity comes from the word fidelity, which means trust. So
Okay.
an infidelity is anything that breaks the trust. And if we think about it in that way, there's infidelity in pretty much every relationship because
Yeah. Yeah.
people break the trust from time to time. And infidelities, when we think about it, we often think about emotional infidelity or sexual infidelity. But when we start getting behind the infractions, for most couples, um, it's not about the sex and it's not about the emotional affair. It's about the struggle the person was having before the infractions and their struggle to find relief from the pain they were feeling.
Hmm.
And it comes out through an emotional affair or a sexual affair.
Right. So is there a way, I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but in the way you think about this and approach it, what's so different about what the culture might think about it? Like where's the paradigm shift or something around what people may not understand about how it works. And maybe
Well,
it's just that the person that with the infraction is acting out of pain. But
sure. I think that there's a couple of tropes that, that we hold on to as society, right? Once a cheater, always a cheater. You throw that
mm,
dog curb. Or if you decide to stay with this person, then you made your bed, you lie in it. Like you made your choices. And so both partners really suffer,
hmm,
because it is hard for society to get behind the fact that people are imperfect
yeah,
and people can hurt each other unintentionally. And the truth of the matter is, for most infidelities, people really do believe that they can separate the act of infidelity from their commitment to the relationship. And they almost believe that they can isolate it and they think they can get away with it. Um, and what I tell people is like, listen, I'm in this work every day. I know every tip and trick to infidelity, and I couldn't get away with it. Like I
right,
couldn't. I would get caught every time,
yeah,
right? Because you always get caught.
right.
But people somehow believe in this fantastical thinking that they can go have this fantasy behavior and get away with it,
Hmm.
and they can't.
Yeah. I've always thought about or talked about with my clients, it's like infidelity is like a bad solution to a problem. I don't know if if that resonates with how you think about it or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's actually a very interesting way of putting it. I agree with that. I think that the infidelity isn't the problem. it's the outlet, it's the symptom, not the problem.
Right.
And so we can talk about changing infidelity-like behaviors, but we haven't solved the problem. We haven't resolved the pain.
Right.
Um, what infidelity does, however, is that it increases the injury. And that's
Yes.
why I think infidelity work really has to be done by a specialist. Um, I recently wrote a book called Unspoken Loss, Men, Infidelity, and Disenfranchised Grief. And it's that intersection of disenfranchised grief that both partners feel that happens through the act of infidelity that most people struggle to identify.
Can you define the term for us? I mean, I feel like I've got a hint about what that disenfranchised
Sure.
grief means, but
So grief is an attachment injury. And when we talk about the phases of grief and we talk about, denial and bartering and anger and depression, all of those things that we go through when we have grief, um, grief happens because we get attached to a person, a concept, or an idea. And as human beings, it is hard for us to hold the reality that we could actually lose that.
yeah.
And the grief process is that we keep trying to go back and reattach to that person or concept that we have lost. It could be our reputation, it could be a job, it could be a person. And so disenfranchised grief is a very particular type of grief. It's the grief that we believe we cannot speak about, or if we speak about it, it would not be supported.
Mm,
And an example of that might be if I'm the person, let's say you and I are married and I have an infidelity, but I'm glad the infidelity is over and I'm really committed to repairing our relationship and I want to be with you. It means that I can't tell you
mm,
that I grieve the loss of my affair partner because
yeah.
that person really did mean something to me, even though I'm glad that it's over, because you're going to tell me what a jerk I am.
Right.
Or
Right.
if I
Right.
tell you that I grieve, that I actually felt good during the infidelity because I finally felt valued and I felt sexually powerful or I felt important or I felt listened to, you're going to tell me to pack my shit and get out,
Say fuck you. Right.
right? And
Right.
so all the things that I can't tell you that I feel like I'm losing because now I'm in this one down position. I am this asshole.
Right.
I'm the person who caused all the problem. I'm not allowed to feel grief.
Right.
And you also can have disenfranchised grief because when you tell all your friends, Elliot went and had an affair, and they tell you throw that dog to the curb, and you're like, and they all want to fix you. They all want to like direct what you're doing. And you're
Right.
like, listen, I'm going to stay in my marriage and my relationship and I'm going to try to work it out. They're like, well, then you know what? I don't want to hear you complaining because you made your choice.
Yeah.
Because therefore, because you made this choice to stay in the relationship, you are no longer allowed to talk about your pain to others
Mm,
because you're not allowed to grieve. You made your choice.
yeah.
So
Well,
both of us, go
eh,
ahead.
well, I was going to say, even for a certain amount of time, in my experience with couples, for a certain amount of time, the person that had the affair can listen to that pain, but at a certain point, they're tired of it too. Like we've been over this and over this and over this. Like that's also a form of disenfranchisement, right? Somebody who's still struggling with the loss or the
Well, I think what becomes really important in this situation is to remind couples that they are trying to heal different injuries.
yeah,
And so often, couples, when they're trying to recover from infidelity, it's like this one thing. We're trying to resolve this one problem, but it isn't. It's
yeah,
actually different problems. And, I think that there is this arc of infidelity recovery. There are these stages that the couple has to go through to be able to get to the other side. And so, one of the things that I talk about a lot are the concepts of forgiveness, trust, and security.
hmm,
And we talk about these things kind of in a collective way, but they're three very different phenomena,
okay,
right? So, forgiveness is an awareness. And forgiveness starts with the awareness of what happened, being really honest, that we're both aware of what happened, because I can't begin the process of forgiveness if I'm not aware.
right,
Trust is a decision. So trust,
Interesting.
because trust is a decision because either I trust you until you give me a reason not to, or I trust you once you've earned it, right? But either way, it's a decision. And it's not a binary decision. There are lots of ways that I trust you, but not always.
Right.
And so getting couples to talk about in what ways, now you may say, if we're this couple, I trust you to provide a good income. I trust you to be a good parent. I trust you to fix the car, but I don't trust you to use electronics right now
Yeah. Yeah.
because you were on your phone. Or I don't trust that you can go out with your friends without checking in. So understanding in what ways do I decide to trust and where do I decide not to trust? And what do we need to do in this relationship so that you can make the decision to trust in this way? And picking out which areas of mistrust do we work on first? But
Yeah.
trust is a decision.
That's so interesting because the way I've talked about trust is it's demonstrated change over time. Like you can't just decide to trust you tomorrow with no evidence, but I guess it's still a decision if you need time and you need
It
to see
is
change.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're saying, this demonstrated behavior over time, is what allows me to trust. Now,
Right.
to build on that concept, security is a feeling,
Okay.
right? So we have an awareness, we have a decision, and we have a feeling, right? And what I think you're talking about, and what I always say, that feeling of security is that expressed changed behavior over time. That creates a sense of security.
Yes.
Some people will say, when I feel secure, I will make a decision to trust you and then I will forgive you. And what I tell people is that is ass backwards. It
Okay.
doesn't work. It works in the other way. I have to be aware of what happened. I have to look at where I can make decisions to trust. Because if I don't ever make a decision to trust you, I will never feel secure with you,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
If I have made the decision to trust, I cannot get to security
Okay.
because I have to make
Interesting.
the decision to trust you. And then once I give you that trust, you have to prove it by doing that continued behavior over time. And over time, I start to ease into that sense of security.
Okay, so talk to me about this though, because forgiveness also seems like a decision, or at least I have worked with so many people that struggle to do that. Does that mean I condone this whole thing and it was okay, or what is I don't even know
Oh,
exactly where all the
yeah,
places.
forgiveness is an awareness, right? Because forgiveness is more about me than it is about you. Forgiveness is I can be aware of everything that happened so that I can start to accept it.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean I like it. It doesn't mean I'm
Right.
happy. It doesn't mean that I feel good. But what it means is that I have accepted the reality and I stop living in a world where I pretend or wish it didn't happen,
Mm, okay.
right?
So it's
Listen,
what allows you to move forward, and let's repair
that's
this.
right.
So let's work on
You
it so I can
cheated on
decide.
me. You brought that person to a hotel room, or you were doing this shit in your car.
Right.
And I thought you were at work or going to visit your mother. And I am aware of all, I accept that happened. I am not living in denial because only when I have moved out of denial
Mm,
can I start looking at what behaviors brought you there. Because remember, the the forgiveness isn't just the awareness of what happened, it's what led up to that behavior.
yeah.
And so when couples come to see me for the very first time for infidelity recovery, the first thing I say to them, which is really painful for them to hear, I'm like, this relationship is over.
Mm,
Let me be flat out honest with you. It's over. Now, here's the question you have to consider. Do you want your next relationship to be with the person who's on the couch next to you? And what will you do to build a new relationship? Because you don't want to go back and repair that old relationship
right. Right.
because
Right.
it didn't work.
Right.
What we're here to do is to develop a new relationship because it's not just the infidelity you're trying to repair, it's everything that led into the infidelity. because infidelities don't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
Nobody wakes up one morning and says, I have this great relationship. You know what I'm doing? I'm going to go fuck around on my spouse.
Well, those are not the people that we can really help, right? There are some of those that
Right. But
really
that's,
don't care
yes.
about other people, but yeah.
Well, that there's a pathology to that,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
an out of control sexual behavior problem. And that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
But the people who really do genuine, but those people don't come back trying to fix their relationship,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
right? The people who were in my office trying to repair their relationship, that infidelity did not happen in a vacuum. It
Yeah.
happened out of a dynamic. Dynamic, by the word, if you break down the word dynamic, di means two, which
Right.
means both of us, you and me, which means you and I created a dynamic that created something where somebody was unhappy, disconnected, ungratified, and that led to a space that allowed infidelity to happen. Now, for the person who was cheated on, they don't want to hear in the beginning that, you know what, you have something you need to look at,
Right.
right?
Right. That's a leap, right? To get to that next stage. I assume that's one of the stages is where
Yes,
we can talk about what was this co-created
absolutely.
situation? Yeah.
So we don't open there. We open up with the person who had the infidelity has to own what they did,
Right.
and they have to do what I call holding vigil. You have to hear the pain that you've caused. And there's all kinds of work we do around holding vigil every day. And I use the boulder on the beach analogy. Do you know the boulder on the beach
I
analogy?
don't. What is that
Hmm.
one?
So what I tell people is, so when there's an infidelity, here's how I describe it in session one. So the two of you were living on a beach. It's a beautiful beach. You love the beach. And you wake up on the beach and you have this beautiful sunset. It's this private beach. It's just the two of you. And you go to bed one night, and while you're sleeping, somebody drops a big ass boulder in the middle of your beach. And you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my God, I can't sit on the beach. I can't see the water. I can't see the sunset. All the things I loved about being on this beach are now ruined. Now,
Okay.
you have a couple of options. You can leave the beach. You
Right.
can you can leave. You can just go. Or you can do what some couples do. I'm just going to live around the boulder and pretend like it doesn't exist. You
Right.
know those
Right.
couples?
Yes.
And they live on the outskirts of their beach, trying to reach around and get a little peek of the ocean when they can. And then there are those couples that say, we don't want this boulder on our beach. And so they both start hammering away on the big boulder, getting little chips to fly off every once in a while. Maybe they even get the boulder to crack into two.
Yeah.
And they keep hammering and hammering till they get a bunch of rocks. Then they keep banging on the rocks till they get gravel, until eventually the gravel becomes part of the sand on their beach. It's still there,
Right. Right.
but it gets incorporated. We don't ever leave our infidelities behind. We don't ever leave the grief behind, but we learn how to make it part of our beach, and we learn to live with it in a way that we have learned. And it's by that joint effort together that we break it apart.
Right. So when you talk about each person has very different pain, different disenfranchised grief, different, injuries,
Yes.
does that work need to be separate with their own individual therapist, or is this something you feel like really can be in the room together, that they can be in that, hear about it from each other and work? Is that a couples thing, or is that like, oh, that's something you each deal with separately and don't the other person
I
doesn't
think
have to
it's
hear about it?
both, actually. I think it's both. When I'm doing infidelity recovery, if I'm the couples therapist, I want both of them to be in individual work. And I want to be able to work with both individual therapists.
Yeah.
Because when I do couples work, what I tell people, I look at person A and I'm like, you are not my client. I look at person B and I say, you are not my client. Your marriage is my client, right? That's who my client is, your marriage,
Yeah.
your relationship. When I'm doing the individual work around infidelity, I want to be able to talk to the couples therapist. And I think that addressing this disenfranchised grief is key and critical in helping infidelity recovery move faster. And I tell folks, infidelity recovery, this is not a 6-month process,
Right.
right? You're going to be here for a while, because even if it was just a one experience infidelity, it is everything that led up to that infidelity is what we have to work on.
Right.
Again, because this relationship is over and you're building a new relationship.
Yeah.
We are not going back to the old dynamics. right? Because if we just go back to what happened before the infidelity, then we still have the dynamic that allows infidelity to happen.
Right. Right. So what are the basic phases or stages of the work?
Well, the first is crisis and trauma, right?
Hmm.
And both parties are in crisis and trauma. And then we get to this phase where you're not necessarily in crisis and trauma anymore. And I tell folks on day one when they literally can't breathe, I'm like, I promise you, you won't be here forever because you can't live your life in this
Right.
elevated state.
Right.
So once we get out of crisis and trauma, we get to a point where there's some kind of balancing. And this is where the work begins. Because when they're in crisis and trauma, we're just addressing the crisis.
Right. Right.
Crisis passes, we move into the reality phase. And this is where the person who had the infidelity starts to lean in and takes the ownership of what has happened.
Hmm.
And the betrayed, I don't like saying the hurt partner because both
They're both
partners
hurt.
are hurt,
Yeah.
right? But the betrayed partner then has to be able to communicate the well of pain.
Hmm.
And the person who has had the act of infidelity has to be able to take that. I always say, listen, you took this tray full of shit and you just dumped it all over your partner. You can't leave it there. You have to clean that shit up before we do anything.
Right.
Um, the phase after that is when you're not living with your triggers every second of every day. I tell the partners in the second phase, it's all you're thinking about all day long.
Right.
Like you're calmer, you're not in crisis, but it is ever present.
Yeah.
The third phase is you start to realize that there are periods during your day when all of a sudden, I actually haven't been thinking about it for the last 2 hours. And then something happens and it all comes back again.
Right.
And this is where, again, we start to really work to rebuild trust. And we're really working on that trust security process.
Okay.
Then you get to a period, and it inevitably happens with every couple. We are so good. Like, we're feeling good about this relationship. And I'm like, oh, hold on, the work's not over.
Right.
Because what happens is you're like, okay, we're in therapy. Like, why? Now we're working on the marriage. We're not necessarily doing infidelity recovery, but we're doing good marital work. And they're like 6 months, like, okay, we're good. We've healed from this. And I'm like, it's coming. And then something's going to happen. Somebody's going to reach into a coat in a closet and pull out a receipt, or they're going to talk to somebody, or they're going to see something in a movie, and there's going to be that trigger, and it slingshots them all the way back to the beginning.
Mm.
And I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. Now what we do is we go use all the tools that we have learned, all of the coping mechanisms, and we come back to where we were. And I remind them, this is going to happen from time to time. You're going to hit that trigger. You're going to slingshot back to the beginning, and we have to work our way back again.
Right.
But what happens is every time that happens, it gets a little easier and it gets a little faster because we've done that forgiveness, trust, and security work.
Hmm. So where in the process do you start to bring in the co-created dynamic that laid this fertile ground for infidelity in the first place? Like the pain of that person who cheated, perhaps, with their loneliness and the relate, whatever it was that was going on.
When they get to a point where they're not thinking about it every second of every day,
Okay.
when we start to get these phases where we can start to like be in life, and because that's when we start turning the corner and start saying, we're not just doing infidelity recovery, we're doing this hybrid of infidelity recovery and relationship work.
Yeah.
And
It's
we're building the new relationship.
right. It seems like, I mean, I guess I should ask where are the sticking points or the challenging places for couples in this work? Because one of them seems to me to to make that transition from wait, you just did this bad thing, we're just processing how mad and hurt I am, to oh wait, maybe there's a place for me to take some accountability for what the state of our relationship before it happened. Like that, it seems like a transition. I know I've had people that struggle with that um,
Right. And
step.
it looks different for every couple, right? Every couple is different. So when exactly does that happen? I don't know. It,
Okay,
it
yeah,
depends on who's in front of me, right?
right,
As
right,
I tell people, there is no off-the-shelf manual that says this is what infidelity recovery looks like. Even my book on infidelity says, like, here are generalizations, here are broad frameworks that you need to think about as you go through this. But what does it mean for you? I don't know. It depends on who you're working with, and it depends on, your own, how you are coming to this work,
Yeah.
right? There is no one way through this. It's the way you and your beloved work your way through this. And every single couple I work with is unique and different.
Yeah. So, are there some ways of thinking of the biggest challenges in rebuilding trust or in starting to really look at the problem that set this whole
Yeah,
thing off
I,
in the
I
first
think
place?
I think there's a couple of really important factors here. One, again, remembering that you're not healing from the same injury.
Yeah.
You're going through this process together, but you're healing very different wounds for very different reasons. And somehow or another, I want my beloved to feel my pain. Nobody can feel your pain.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
the person who caused it cannot feel your pain because it is uniquely yours.
Right.
And
Right.
all they can do is bear witness to what you're telling them. And, I tell people all the time that all of the fallacies we have around relationship, love and sex is amazing. And I hope you get lots of it in all the ways that is gratifying for you. But love and sex will not keep you together.
Mm.
The key and the glue in relationship is intention and curiosity. And if you can't be intentional and you can't be curious, move on,
Yeah.
right? People say to me all the time, when do you know the relationship is over? When you can't be intentional and you can't be curious. It
Interesting.
doesn't matter how great the sex is,
Right.
right? If you can't be curious and you can't be intentional about yourself, about the other, about the union, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that infidelity recovery is a lot about reminding people and teaching people how to be intentional and curious.
Yeah. So, what are the biggest roadblocks that you see for people?
Um, I think some of the biggest roadblocks are um, uh, ongoing dishonesty.
Mm.
Um, I think the death by a thousand cuts,
Yeah.
that every time they come into session, there's been another minor disclosure.
Oh, okay.
So
That's
there's
a
just one
actually.
more.
So, should people just like, here's the whole thing? Like, that's a good point to.
I think that the story has to come out, and it's better that the story all comes out at once. I
Okay.
think the other big sticking block is when the betrayed partner becomes an interrogator versus an investigator.
Okay. Say a little bit more about that.
So the interrogator is like, I want to know exactly what you did. Who touched who? How did you touch each other? Like, what were you wearing? Like, they create these visual images in their head that they can't get over.
Yeah. It feels so
And
important to them to know it, right? But then it's not gonna serve them.
but what they're doing is they're traumatizing themselves.
Okay.
Whereas an investigator is like asking questions like, how did you feel walking into the hotel room? How did you feel walking out of the hotel room? At what point did you consider me?
Yeah.
See,
If at all.
these are
Right.
much
Right. Right.
more important questions, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because
Yes.
that's not creating this intense, detailed visual picture that I'll never get over.
Yeah.
And those are the types of pieces of information that actually help us to heal.
Okay. Okay. So
So
most disclosure should come in one, I mean, close together, right? Not death by a thousand cuts. Not like, yeah.
right. Now, to be fair, though, is helping the betrayed partner realize is that when the person who committed the act of infidelity is doing all of this, they're also in a state of trauma.
Mm.
And their memory may be challenged because they are so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the betrayed partner often gets extraordinarily angry and rageful when they ask a question and they're like, I don't remember. And we have to help them realize that you're not the only one in trauma here.
Yeah.
Um, And so that disclosure may happen in pieces, but we want it as close together as we can.
Right, right,
But
right.
the slow drip of data is deadly.
Yeah, yeah. Which I imagine people are doing. I don't know. Maybe it's a variety of things. Like I don't want to tell you more than I have to, or maybe they're trying to protect their partner. Like if I
Well, I'm
can
trying
just
to
tell you the
help you
minimum,
because I don't
yeah,
want to hurt you.
right,
I'm trying not to hurt you.
yeah,
And what I'm doing is hurting you.
yeah,
I'm not trying to, I'm so ashamed of myself. And this is where the disenfranchised grief comes up. If I tell you all of this, my shame becomes something I can't deal with.
yeah,
Like there's so many reasons why disclosure doesn't happen in an appropriate way.
yeah,
And that's why having it facilitated by a trained infidelity therapist is really important.
right. What's the role of? I mean, I assume it's crucial. Remorse, right?
Oh, of course. Well, uh, remorse is key and critical,
yeah.
right? Because forgiveness for yourself, because when we're in that first stage of awareness, that forgiveness, it's not just awareness and forgiveness for you, it's awareness and forgiveness for me. Trust, that decision to trust, isn't do I trust you, but also do I trust me?
Mm-hmm.
Security isn't just do I feel secure with you, it's do I feel secure with me?
Right.
Like all of this runs in parallel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we can't go through that process if there isn't remorse. And both parties have to feel it. Like at some point, the betrayed partner has to feel remorse, not just
For
rage
the original dynamic, right? That
for the original dynamic,
yeah.
remorse for how much pain my beloved must have felt to do this,
Yeah. Yeah.
remorse for um, how I acted out in rage. At some point, my rage is understandable.
Right.
But when I get past the rage, I'm like, oh, I said some things I don't feel good about.
Yeah.
Like I'm right now, I'm working with this couple who's done really hard work in infidelity recovery. When they first came to me, he was living in a hotel because discovery had just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And in our first session, it was an online session. We had set up where she was going to be home and he was going to be at the hotel, and she showed up at the hotel. So I
Ah,
had them both in the same room and they were supposed to be separate. I'm like,
yeah.
all right, let's go. And she just railed.
Yeah.
And and he's sitting there and he's crying and he's wailing and she's screaming at him, why did you do that? Throwing all these fiery questions. And every time he tried to speak, her response was, shut up. You're
Right.
not allowed to speak. Like meanwhile,
Yeah.
she's asking questions, but not allowing him to answer because all
Yeah.
of her was coming out. And later, several months later, she's like, I am like, that
Yeah.
was so painful. And she felt remorse for the fact that this man who she really does love, that she was so hurtful to him in that moment of rage.
Right.
Now, her rage was justifiable, it was supportable,
Yeah.
and yet she hurt him.
Yeah.
And she was able later, when her rage had resolved itself, to express a sense of remorse for that moment,
Right.
even though it was justifiable and understandable.
Where my therapist brain goes is, do you intervene at all at that? Do you expect the person who cheated to just sort of withstand whatever barrage of rage and nastiness is thrown at them? Like they somehow deserve that whatever the aggrieved party
It depends.
wants to do?
Oh,
Because
there's
that,
never a,
because it can just go on for a long time, and it's like, oh,
yeah.
that's hard.
It depends on the situation. It depends on the partners, and it depends on each other's how I know their coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
It depends on the offense. It depends on so many factors. There are times that I have intervened. I'm like, okay, hold on, time out.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to take a breath here because what you're doing is damage you're not going to be able to step back from.
Yeah.
And I've done that before. There are times where letting the rage out is important. And I've said to the person who committed the act of offense, I'm like, just breathe. And I'll intervene for a second. I'll say, I need you to breathe
Yeah.
and I need you to listen.
Yeah.
But I need to know that you're breathing. And when you've had enough, I need you to raise your hand so I can intervene. Like if
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
can't take anymore, raise your hand. So there's different ways of doing it, but yeah, sometimes it needs to come out.
Yeah.
Better it comes out with me where I can mitigate it and
Yeah.
then explain it.
Yes.
I
Right.
can translate it. I can ask questions where the other person just becomes shell shocked.
Right. Right. You
Yeah.
said it depends on the offense. And one of the things I did an affair training years ago with David Snarsh, and he said there's this
Mm.
whole continuum from like, oh, you're on a business trip and you get drunk and you have this one night, that kind of thing. And on the other end is like a year-long affair with your sister or your best friend, or, and whether you,
Or sex workers, or I'm spending, right, because then it becomes complicated. Because it's not only that I had sex with others, but if I'm going and having sex with sex workers, and that offends your value system because you have a certain value around sex workers or how women are, because then, is that woman being taken advantage of? Like there's
right,
all
right,
kinds of
right.
concerns. And then you're
Well, and it
using
involves
our
money,
money
right? Our
and
money to do
you're
it.
using our money.
Yeah.
There's all, or how you got caught. Was it
Yeah.
Ashley Madison? Or I was told this because you were seen by my best friend.
Right, right. Did I
And
come to you and tell you, or did you have to
yeah, there's
discover
so
it? Did I
and that's where
deny it? Did I not? Yeah. So
all the
there are
dynamics
there are
matter.
shades of betrayal here, right? There's a
Oh, well,
continuum.
there's multiple layers of and
Yeah.
what I tell people, an infidelity is never just one offense. A guy goes out and he gets a blowjob, right? It's never just one offense. There's 15 offenses in there.
Meaning considering it, acting on it, looking it up, showing
Well,
up.
but it's
Right.
the layers. And then it's what happens after.
Yeah.
And I always tell people that the infidelity doesn't start when you take your pants down. The infidelity started when you allowed the thought or the consideration to enter your head.
Yeah.
That's when the infidelity started.
Right.
Then you just played it out from there,
Right. Right.
right?
And you
When you logged online, when you bought somebody a drink.
right, right. And then when you said you were going somewhere different, and then you come back and say that's where you've been. I mean, you're right. There's so much
That's
dishonesty
right.
in it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard
You
work.
did mention the trope, the belief, once a cheater, always a cheater.
Mhm.
Um, do you want to just quickly address that?
I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. And I know this for a fact. In so much of my work over the years, a singular infidelity is a moment of weakness and a cry for help.
Right.
Now, to your point, we mentioned it briefly earlier in the conversation. There are some people where infidelity is pathological.
Right.
Those aren't the people we're talking about. That's a
Right.
very different problem.
Right.
What I'm talking about are the people who fall into an infidelity, whether it's a single incident or a year-long affair or a series of one-offs, but it is their way of coping with some kind of existential or emotional or relational pain that they can't bring back to the relationship, but they really are committed to the relationship and want it to heal. And I often say that infidelities in many ways are like cancer. Listen, nobody wants cancer. Nobody wishes cancer on anybody. Um, and if you know anyone who has survived cancer, what they'll tell you is that the treatment for cancer often is worse than the disease itself. It makes you sick. It is awful. It weakens you. You feel like you're going to break. And it makes you feel pathetic. But once you survive cancer, many people will tell you that they're grateful for it because they have greater insight on life. They have a stronger lust for life. They're more committed to doing what they're doing. They take better care of themselves. They bounce back once they've survived cancer. And I think infidelity is very much the same way. If you can survive it and you can survive the treatment for infidelity, ooh,
It can
most
be,
people will tell you they have a much better dynamic in their
yeah.
relationship.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you to end on that hopeful note because I have definitely had people who, well, same thing with sexual dysfunction sometimes too. These really difficult things in their life, and it ends up being a gift because they
Absolute
really had
gift.
to rethink things, do things differently, build this new relationship, and
We
yeah,
talk more, we talk in greater detail. Our sex life is better. I feel there's more transparency. We're engaging more. I feel more valued because you fought for me.
right, right.
Oh, It
Great.
can be a beautiful thing.
All right. So please tell people, you mentioned your book, but like say the title again, where people reach out to you, anything else you might want to
Sure. So
make available.
I actually have two books that people might
Okay.
be interested in. The first one is called Couples by Intention. Creating and cultivating relationships that matter, that really talks about a lot of this relationship work and being intentional and being curious. The second book is called Unspoken Loss, Men, Infidelity, and Disenfranchised Grief, which really does talk about when infidelity happens, how do we explore the recovery process? And this book is unique because most books on infidelity are written from the perspective of the betrayed partner.
Yes.
This one is written from the perspective of the man who is betrayed, specifically men who commit acts of infidelity, and what it's like for him to try to fight for his relationship again, and how do we understand him? So it's got a unique take on it.
Right.
And it really has that element of disenfranchised grief and how important that is for both partners. These books can be bought online, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, or quality booksellers near you. Um,
Right.
People can reach out to me on my website um, at drelliotk.com. Elliot has two L's and two T's, drelliotk.com. Just go to the contact page. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Can I just ask you a quick question? Women also cheat. Is your book
Of course.
appropriate for women with this disenfranchised grief of being the one that cheated, or is it because you
Yeah,
said so specifically it's
yes.
for men? What's different if it's a woman?
Well, this book, it's definitely translatable.
Okay.
The reason why I say it's about men is because I also did a national study on men who have cheated, and I've
Ah,
incorporated a lot of my national study into that. But the lessons in the book and the recovery process you'll find is the same. The thing that makes it about men is the
the
national research
research,
that I did.
basically. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much for having me. What a lovely conversation.